And you know, these are in a sense they're common experiences that many people have and describe. You know, feelings of expansiveness and increased awareness of love, and many people, you know, would describe such experiences.
And you were working as a psychologist at this time?
I was working as a lecturer.
A lecturer, yeah.
At that time, and getting increasingly involved with teaching in the field of therapy and counselling at the time, yeah, at the same time.
So, and then at some point you started to go to lectures by Tony Parsons.
I did indeed.
Am I leaving out a huge chunk by saying that?
Not at all.
No,
you're leaving nothing of any importance out whatsoever.
All right.
At a certain point, I did indeed, yes.
And why were you drawn to Tony?
It's a very strange thing, actually. I went to see Tony once a long time ago. Not long after he started giving public talks, and I was invited there by somebody I knew, and I thought he was okay. I liked him, thought what he was saying was interesting, and had absolutely no desire to go back whatsoever at that time, and no interest in going back at all. Just went away and forgot it and thought, you know, I don't want yet another, you know, spiritual path, as I might have described it at the time. And it was some time later, probably maybe as much as 2 years later, I can't really remember, when there was a bit of a strange synchronicity which took me back. So there was maybe something like a 2-year gap between my first visit and my second visit to him. What happened was that purely by coincidence, 2 different people that I knew mentioned that he had a meeting coming up in Hampstead and invited me to it. And they made it sound quite fun, with talk of eating and drinking afterwards. So it sounded quite attractive. So I thought, what the hell, I'll go along again. So I went for that second time, and I can't really explain it. Just something clicked, and I found myself going back after that, again and again. Just something about the energy, something about what he was saying. I mean, I certainly couldn't understand it at the time, but nevertheless, there was something about it. It used to provoke pretty strong feelings in me of a variety of contradictory feelings, a variety of feelings, but I just found myself going back after that. That's partly because it was such fun. I mean, it was fun to be at the meetings. I loved the energy. I loved his energy, and it was a fun thing to do afterwards.
And were you relatively happy in your life at the time?
I was I was no more unhappy than I'd been at any other point in the 30 years of seeking. I would say probably on the scale of happy to unhappy, I was probably pretty much the same as I'd been at any other point in my in those 30 years of seeking. But going to see Tony and then hanging out with a nice crowd of people, eating and drinking afterwards, was kind of one of the high points.
Yeah, no, I can understand
at the time.
Yeah.
It was very simple, very basic. You know, I think I liked the simplicity of it.
And you felt there was kindred spirits in the meetings there?
Yes, yeah, I felt there were kindred spirits, yes. And I suppose by then, I don't think I would have been fully conscious of this at the time, but I think looking back, I think by then I had already internally started to turn away from all the very complex spiritual stories that I'd sniffed around, as it were. I kind of flirted with a lot of things, Tibetan Buddhism, for example, various yogic philosophies, and they all seem so complicated. And I think somewhere inside me there was beginning to grow the glimmering of a thought that, you know, if there really is something that I'm missing, and I mean, I was by no means certain that there was, but if there was something that I was missing, then I was beginning to suspect that it was something very simple indeed, but something which for some reason I just couldn't get.
I think you said something very significant there about simplicity, yeah. So, and then there's this, you talked about, we were joking about earlier, you talk about in your book about Charing Cross Station, platform 5.
Yes.
and something seemed to happen there.
Yes. I don't know whether to say that Charing Cross Station Platform 5 is in a highly significant place or to suggest that it's completely irrelevant, but one or the other or somewhere in between those two, yes. It was just a momentary event, I'll call it. I mean, probably a split-second event. But when I describe it as when I came back after it, because it was just an event in which there was a complete and total disappearance of the person in every way. And not in the way that I felt I had experienced it through meditation, where the person had kind of thinned and become translucent and so forth, but everything else had thinned and become translucent because I was in meditation. Not like that. Nothing changed. Absolutely nothing changed. Good old Charing Cross Station just went on being good old Charing Cross Station. The only difference was that I wasn't in it. And that was probably a split second. And then I was back, and there was the recognition that something very significant seemed to have happened, although I didn't understand what it was.
So when you came back, or you felt you were back, apart from the thought there was something significant happened, was there a feeling? Was there a feeling, expansion, fear? It was just simple.
Absolutely. I mean, this is why I say it's so difficult to describe. It's so different from what I would describe as the sort of spiritual experiences that, you know, as I say, I and many people have on meditative paths and so forth. It was it's a paradigm shift. It had no connection with that. It wasn't like that, but more intense in any way whatsoever. It was a different paradigm. There was none of that. I sometimes call those meditative experiences kind of pink and fluffy, and you know, it's a feeling of expansion and love and so forth. Nothing like that at all. Absolutely nothing. Nothing changed. The only difference was that suddenly there was no person in it, and it seemed to become clear that the person isn't a necessity.
The person isn't a necessity.
Yeah. I suppose
okay.
For however many years, I can't remember how old I was, but whatever, for 57, 58 years, there had been an unconscious, I'll call it an assumption, really, an unconscious absolute certainty and knowing that the person is, of course, a necessity, because the person is the centre of everything that happens. And without the person at its centre, nothing can happen. And in that split second, that totally disappeared. It was completely seen through. The person is not a necessity.
So it was like a realisation through an experience, but then the person was back.
Yeah. I avoid, I don't know whether it matters, I avoid using the word experience, because for me an experience is something that happens to a person. So I don't know if it helps to clarify it or not, but I would, you know, I call this an event.
Okay, event,
and then the personal experience comes back, but somewhat, both somewhat in a state of shock and also somewhat changed. But nevertheless, still back and still unhappy and still searching.